Obviously, saya tak dari di sini, but I've been here now 3 years. Basically, I'm not Malaysian. I'm actually British, but I've been in Malaysia now for the last 3 years. Just a bit about my career to get to where I've got to, because some of that I think will help share some of the information that I'm going to share with you. I started my career a long time ago, about 12 years ago, as a teacher in a Hard Knocks South London school. Also, just put your hand up and wave at me if I'm speaking too quickly, okay? And then after that, I worked in government, trying to help improve education systems. And then I also worked in the private sector for a consultancy, for a design consultancy. And what I'm going to share with you, a lot of the information and the concepts actually come from that time where back in Britain there was something called Building Schools for the Future. And to Yiling's point, every country in the world struggles with trying to improve its education system. You know, no matter whether you're the best in the world, like Finland, all the way through to, say, the conditions that we have currently in Malaysia. And so what I'll be sharing with you will be from the Building Skills for the Future experience, £60 billion to be spent over 20 years to try to improve the British education system. And so I think there are parallels. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, and what I'm hoping is, at the end of my section, you're going to have something to take away with you. Because from what I understand, you're budding entrepreneurs, you're leaders at your university, right? And so I think fundamentally, maybe you want to make lots of money, but I think the most common theme amongst all of you is probably a big desire to get something done, to see some sort of change. And that's why I'm in education. I never actually intended to go to education. My master's was in sustainable development. But I've actually come to believe that education is actually the root solution to virtually every ill and problem that we may face. So thank you, Yiling. What I took away from Yiling's point was, yes, education, the role of education in nation building is critical. And I won't repeat everything she said, but there was something in the news recently. The World Bank attaché for Malaysia. So he was speaking at Economic Forum. I don't know if you've heard about this. And he was speaking back in March, but it's only just made the news now. And he was basically talking about household debt in Malaysia. Right? And everybody's very scared about household debt. You know, my CIMB credit cards max the limit. And he was saying, look, don't worry about your household debt. Worry about the quality of your education. And that's coming from the World Bank. So I think that proves more than anything else that there is an issue in the Malaysian education system for the quality. Now, to Yiling's point, there is a plan, the Malaysian blueprint, which is a great aspiration. And we're part of that, Teach for Malaysia. We're trying to help solve that and help that actually work through. So the next bit, I'm going to work through two concepts with you. So first of all, understanding the system. So if the system is the best solution, but it's also potentially the problem, how do we actually look at any system? Well, the first thing we probably want to do is generally just take your typical, rational, scientific approach, which is number one, just understand what the system's made up of. Now, education systems are huge. Most countries in the world are either the first or the second biggest expenditure on national income. Right? I think in Malaysia it's 400,000 people who are directly employed. Whereas Petronas, I don't know, was it 20? Something like that. So you can imagine the nature, how big is this? So I'm just going to share with you 5 pieces. And this is a concept you take to any problem that you're trying to solve, any system. So number one, what is the vision that the education system has? Is it the correct vision? So Yiling shared the blueprint, right? The vision in the blueprint is for a future state that we want education to be. But if that vision is the wrong vision, there's a problem. Okay? So that's one thing we have to know. Make sure we get the right vision. 2, pedagogy. Anybody want to take a call on what pedagogy means?
The way to teach.
Theory of change?
The way to teach, right?
Correct. He's saying the way to teach. What's your name?
Diallo Yagubo.
Sorry, I can't pronounce it.
Okay,
okay, thank you. No, how you teach, yeah. It's your basic concepts about what you think is the best way to teach. It's your philosophy of teaching and learning. Should the teacher stand in the class and just basically tell the class what they need to learn? And so it's pure memorization, rote learning. That was one version of pedagogy. There's lots of different versions. So is the pedagogy the right pedagogy? Okay? 2, resources. Taylor's campus, Lakeside campus, is beautiful. We're sitting here in this nice hall where everybody all the way to the back can see me and hear me. Okay? Are the resources what we need for the education system? So this is everything from, you know, computers through to school buildings. So do we have the right resources? So that's another component that we need to be aware of. People. Who's working in the system, right? Are they the right people? Do they have the right skills? And then lastly, I'm putting this in here, politics. Okay, I'm using the USA for Democrats and what the other Republicans, right? politics can play such a big part. I'm talking about politics in the broadest manner here. I'm talking about the unions amongst the teachers. I'm talking about what's happening at governmental level. Because, for example, education systems are notorious for being slow to adapt change. So if the politics can't actually agree, and they're constantly changing direction, can you imagine what happens to the education system? It's going to get pretty messed up. The Finnish education system, which everybody points to say it's wonderful, they started that process back in 1960. And they're reaping the rewards now. So that's number one. And this is our typical approach to addressing any kind of big systemic problem. We automatically go and have a look at the components. We get out that flowchart, that organisational structure for the MOE, and we say to ourselves, where's the problem? And we try to fix it, right? Okay, that's logical, and it's good. I'm not saying it's not good. But there's a big, big problem with this. And I think we need a more sophisticated approach to understanding any complex system. Basically, oh, there it is. Yeah, you need to understand the system. Sorry. And why is this so important? Our understanding of the system is our way or our pathway to help us come to a solution. And the analogy I want to take is this: mental health, right? Before advances in psychology and medication, right? When people with many, many mental health issues, right? What do people think of them? What do they think was wrong with them? Schizophrenia, for example. 200 years ago, if you were schizophrenic, people thought you were possessed. And the solution was to send some sort of spiritual support. Now, I'm not denying that there is value in spirituality. But what I am saying is, if you only understand the problem through the wrong type of lens, and you don't have the awareness of other things, you're not going to fix the problem. Now we know we can fix issues because maybe there is a physical issue with the brain. Yeah? So this is why it's so valuable. And the reason why I think we need something more sophisticated is this. We think about all those components: vision, pedagogy, people, right? Take the example of this. Thanks. The curriculum, right? Now let's say in Malaysia, we could say at the moment the curriculum, is it giving the skills that people need for the 21st century? Right? And we say no. So what we do is we go along and we create a wonderful curriculum that's going to help all our students have wonderful skills so they can speak 4 languages, so that they can be critical thinkers, right? Brilliant. Have we fixed it? No. Because the problem with it is, we change the curriculum, but who's going to deliver the curriculum? It'll be the teachers, the people. Are they on board with this? Do they have the skill set to deliver that curriculum? Equally, if we change the curriculum, what do the politicians think about this? Is there general consensus to support it? And lastly, are the resources even aligned to support that? So for example, the reason why you have classrooms with teachers standing at the front is because in the old way of doing things, the teacher is the font of all knowledge. And it was a transmission. Yeah? It's based on the old churches, basically. Somebody standing on the lectern, talking didactically. But actually, if you actually look at the way the world's working now, with the internet, there are kids out there who are far, far more apt and able to access information. They know more than their teachers do. And it's all about group work, but the classrooms don't support that. So what you end up with this, imagine the whole education system, or any complex system, as a motor. And the motor, when it's all working fine and nice, yeah, it's all working together. They're all interdependent. And when those things work well together, you get the best power, the best output. And I would argue that the best output here would be a quality education. But just like a motor, if you get one bit spinning along, but nothing else is moving, either, number one, the output's not going to be very strong, or there's actually going to be friction and problems. And you can think of all sorts of things. Maybe we fix these 3 and we get those rolling, but we haven't actually aligned it to the visual resources. Maybe those ones are running, great, but the people don't want to move. Yeah, so the actual delivery is rubbish. And lastly, maybe some people just get the wrong end of the stick and they do something completely different. So my point is this: number one, correct, let's actually look at the components, and you have to do your analysis of whatever it is you're working on and identify what the components are. But most importantly, how do they interrelate to one another? And I think the analogy of some sort of motor can really help when we're doing this. Now, just a very quick activity, so I've got about 5 minutes left. Having said all that, and I know you're not all necessarily experts in the education systems, and I'm not sure of your background, etc., but I just want you to work in groups of 3, 2 minutes. I want you to come up with which one of these components, if you had to focus on right now, in your country, or in your context, would you spend your resources on in order to improve the whole system? To address whatever issue there is in your education system. So 3 minutes, speaking with a partner, and you just have to come up with one, okay? Which is the one that you would focus on? And also, if you don't like that and you think, actually, you know what, I can't think of one, there's this, have you heard of a Diamond 5 approach to solving, like, hierarchy? If you're not sure what you want to work on, if you're not sure which is the most important, say all of them are important, but just put at the very, very top, this person thinks vision's the most important, but they say, actually, pedagogy, politics, people, that is important as well. But the least important, but still important, is resources. And what this allows you to do is basically say everything's important, but it still allows you to focus on one thing. So 3 minutes, just talking to your partner. If you were to fix something in education, what would it be? Okay? Olé. Because I'm running out of time. But anyway, sorry about that. I've also been told to smile more because I got very serious there. It's because I truly believe in this stuff, but yeah. So, okay, a very good question I had was, why is there only 5? Really good point. You could have hundreds, whatever those components are. And the point here is I'm just trying to bucket the main areas and just a process, a way to think about things. So just very quickly, putting our hands up, I want to know how many of you put down vision as the thing you would focus on. Okay, fine. Okay. How many for pedagogy? Okay. How many for politics? Hello. Okay, fine. People. Okay. And then lastly, resources. Okay, to be honest, there's no right or wrong answer, because as this is trying to say, everything's important. If you're very interested, there's a concept called wicked problems. I'm not going to go into it today, but just this kind of issue here, the way people are thinking about the problem, if you look into the idea of wicked problem, shows you the challenge is trying to find consensus amongst people. What is the issue? What is the real underlying problems here? But I'm just going to share with you now what Teach for Malaysia is doing, and why we're focused on one particular area out of all of these. Okay? And so what it is, we have focused on people at Teach for Malaysia. Fundamentally, Teach for Malaysia is about recruiting people, great people who want to see a change, and replacing them to be excellent teachers, but who want to improve the education system. And whatever they do with their lives, whether they stay in education, in the teaching, whether they go on, we want them to stay there, fighting to improve education for everybody. Okay? But why is this? Well, as I said before, I used to work for a consultancy, I did that whole thing in the UK. And basically, we're talking about change management. Okay? What is a structure that we could use to conceptualize how best can we approach this crazy big system that's called education? Some of you might prefer other ones. McKinsey have their 7 S's. But the company I used to work for, DGW, we had the 3 Ps. I think it's easier, and I like Venn diagrams. And equally, just like the motor, the concept is simply this. Where you get people on board with the processes, so actually what they're supposed to do every single day in their role, aligned with whatever resource, the place that exists, that sweet spot is there, in the middle. And that is where we're going to get the best output, the best motor running for any organisation. Okay? But how do you actually get there? Okay. Well, let's separate all these component pieces. And you can think about it perhaps in whatever you're doing in your entrepreneurship ideas, your unions, whatever it might be. Typically, the easiest way and the historical way people have done things is they're focused on fixing a resource issue. Oh, you know what? The problem is ICT literacy. So we just need to put in loads of computers into schools, right? Or it might be they'll focus on the process. What we need is more paperwork to make sure all teachers do what they're supposed to do, right? So teachers spend more time doing paperwork. And after all this, you expect people to play ball and to fit into it. Yeah? But over 30 years worth of experience, what we learned was this: yes, of course, maybe you do need computers. Yes, we do need processors. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, if people aren't on board, if people don't understand what it is they're supposed to be doing, if they are not willing or wanting a skill and a will to engage with all of this, the impact is going to be minimal. So it's quite unfortunate. If you look at most big initiatives that any government rolls out typically, or social entrepreneurship sometimes, and you look at the budget, how much is actually kept for getting people on board, skilling people up? It's often the smallest amount. And so basically we need to start with the people. And so at Teach for Malaysia, we're trying to create that pool, that source of people into the system who are going to help drive all this from now and into the future. So I'm hoping that there's some concepts here that you can apply in whatever walk of life there is. And I'm going to pass it on now to Ken, who's going to explain exactly, well, more to the point, some of the things that we're doing at Teach for Malaysia to develop that source of pool of talented people. Okay, thank you very much.
In my attempt to create a small conversation with June, I asked her, "What is your next class after this?" And June answered, "Cikgu, saya tak faham apa kamu cakap." And it's translated to, "Teacher, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand what you're saying." At 14 years of age, it is indeed very worrying that June did not understand the sentence of, "What is your next class after this?" And what's even more worrying is that June is not the only person facing such a problem. It's not an isolated case. There are many other similar problems happening in schools. Many other children not meeting the minimum level of proficiency required in most of their school subjects. Now, when I reflect back on my journey in the past, going to university, pursuing tertiary education like all of you was a given. It was something expected of me, and it wasn't something which which I really had to fight for, because it's just a natural course, a phase of life which I had to go through. But if there were no interventions along the way, children like June and other people who were not so well-to-do in their studies or academics will then struggle in their academics and possibly even fail to enter university. Now, why is it a problem if they do not meet the minimum level of proficiency in subjects like math, science, and English? And why is it a problem if they even fail to enter university at all? Now, let me tell you why. Because nation building is dependent on its human capital, and human capitals are the product of our education system. Now, before we go deeper into today's topic, let me introduce myself again. My name is Yiling, and I work with Teach for Malaysia in the talent acquisition team. So what I do on a daily basis is I recruit and select fresh graduates, also young professionals, to join our 2-year Teach for Malaysia fellowship program. Alright, now back to our topic. Okay. So, when we talk about nation building through educational leadership, you might be asking, what does it mean by educational leadership, or how does educational leadership even build a nation? And I think that it's worthy for us to explore the relationship between education and nation building. So, to explore this relationship, one of the questions that I asked myself was, what defines a nation? Because when we understand what defines a nation, we will then understand what is needed to build a nation. And in search for my answers, I was doing a lot of reading after Adrian proposed me to do this talk. And I came across this article. It's from an Australian consulting firm called Change Factory. And it spelled out how they actually define a nation. And this may not speak for every country out there, but I think it's a very general and broad concept which is applicable. The notion that a nation is defined by 3 elements, which is its past, its present, and its future. Now let me explain a little bit deeper what I mean by past, present, and future. Now, our history, culture, and languages constitute our past. So like almost everything in life, history is important because we need to learn from what happened in the past so as to not make the same mistakes or to make better decisions in the future. But that's not all to our past. We also have our culture, we also have our languages, and and we also have our shared experiences that define our identity as a citizen. And this national identity is something that no one can take away from us. And as it is currently, history is a subject which is taught in almost every country, that is almost compulsory in every education system. And it's because of that realization of nations that citizens need to understand where they came from, what was in the past, in order for them to appreciate what they have now. And so that's what we have with history. And the present consists of our human capitals and capabilities. So the human capital is the direct product of the education system. The education system has the ability to produce individuals who are skilled in terms of, whether it's math, science, or languages, all kinds of skills. But what's most important is that this human capital is what is going to drive our economy in the future. And I'm going to give you an analogy of a family institution. So take for example, if you're in a family, you have parents who inculcate good values in you, and when they do so, in the way you were brought up, you would then understand your roles and responsibilities in the family, right? And with that understanding of the roles and responsibilities, you are then able to contribute effectively to your family in terms of whether it's income or whether it's emotional or family support. And the same goes for the nation as well. The nation is just an extension of your family, and the education system that the government puts in place is essentially the parent. And a good education system would be able to produce skilled, talented individuals, values-driven individuals who then contribute to the nation. Sorry, too fast. Okay, and then we have the future. Now, our future is defined by many things, but a large chunk of it would be the economic growth of the country, because that's how we sustain our country as well. Now, as I mentioned before, the education system produces talent in order for us to drive the economy in the future. And as we have quality education, this then translates to skillful employees, higher employability, higher productivity, and then translates to higher national income. And with a higher national income, we will then be able to invest more in the resources, for example, the education sector. And it creates a cycle which is sustainable, because the more we invest in education, the more we are going to reap results from it. And that's how these three elements of past, future, and present come into play. But to give you a better practical understanding of how we can put these three ideas together, I'm going to show you this. So this is just an example of the Malaysian education system. And as you can see here, we have the Malaysian Education Blueprint. And the Malaysian Education Blueprint is essentially a document which spells out the vision that Malaysia has for its education system in the next 11 to 12 years. And I want you to look at the 6 aspirations that the education system has for its students. So number 1 to number 4 focuses on the present day skills and capabilities that we can actually hone in our students. Whereas number 5 and number 6, bilingual proficiency as well as national identity, focuses on the past. So it's important for us to just take note on why number 5 and number 6 were actually included. So we could just focus on 1 to 4 because that's our present day capabilities. And why is it so important that in the Malaysian education system, they focus and put emphasis as well, equal emphasis as well, on bilingual proficiency and national identity? Because incorporating the past and present allows us to have a better understanding of our future. And I guess to sum it all up, I would say that we need to learn from our past and understand our past so that we can work on present day capabilities in order for us to ensure future growth. But it's not always all rainbows and butterflies. As as much as we envision a perfect education system, as much as we envision an ideal nation, there are still problems within the system as well. And a few examples that, a lack of education or lack of quality education can result would include, for example, in this case, 30% of Pakistanis live in extreme poverty and having received less than 2 years of education. And what we can conclude from this is that, the amount of education that one receives does play a major part. The more education you receive, the more likely you are to break the cycle of poverty. And we all know that poverty is a vicious cycle. And that vicious cycle is so hard to break unless we have education coming into the picture. Because with education, then individuals are able to obtain the skills and talents required for them to have gainful employment. Another example would be, in America, students from low-income communities are 40% more likely to drop out of school and end up in prison. So as you can see, education affects so many areas in terms of the economy, the national development, in terms of our safety and well-being. Now, I just want to say that nation building is not having 10% of the population excelling while the other 90% falling behind. Nation building is about ensuring that every single citizen has quality education. Nation building is about ensuring that everyone moves together. Now, all of us are here in this room today because we know the importance of education, and at some point or another, we have had quality education. And that's why what I'm trying to tell you today, or what I'm trying to share with you today, is why we need to further understand the need for everyone to invest or to be invested in the education system of their own country. Now that we know that there are several problems as a result of lack of education or lack of quality of education, we must then need to understand what is the root causes of this problem. And that's why we need to understand the education system. It does not suffice for us to just scratch the surface and just treat the symptoms, but not knowing what are the root causes that happen, underlying causes that causes all these problems to arise. And within the education system, there are many factors then which will contribute to a lack of quality in the education system. And what then are the several factors that my colleague will actually tell you later. So jobs will actually be, and also how it's a problem that we need to really solve, and we need to understand the system in order for us to solve and address the problem. I'm going to pass it to Giles.
Wow, there's a lot of people here. How are you guys feeling? Okay. Was Giles' session mentally stimulating enough? Yes. Okay. So just a little bit of background about myself. My name is Kevin. I graduated in psychology, worked for about 3 years in HR, and I actually joined Teach for Malaysia as a teacher back in 2012. So for the past 2 years, 2012 and 2013, I've been teaching at an island in Pulau Ketam. Anyone know where that is? Yes. Oh really, don't go there for... You're stuck there because I heard last week in the news all the boats were rioting and they didn't allow anybody to come back. But so I spent the last 2 years teaching English in a fisherman village. Very, very interesting experience as well. And so what I want to share today, I think we've heard a little bit from Yiling and Giles as well. Yiling talking about what defines the nation, and Giles talking about how to understand the problem, right? Who here thinks theoretically this is all very large, but I'm not really sure how to create actionable items for myself? Anyone? Everybody's ready? So you all got like actionable items for yourself? Because I think often what we can kind of do is in theory we know a lot of these things, but how do we actually put it into practice? You are now student leaders, you're students, you're some of your young professionals and things like that. How do you actually create change and change this thing that we describe called a nation? It's so huge. The thing that Giles talked about, education system, all of the 5 things we talked about earlier, how much of it can you actually change? Where do you start? So what I want to share, before I go any further, I want to share a story with you. Oh, this is Giles. I want to share a story with you about two people, right? One on the right hand side is Zamir, and on the left hand side is Kieran. Yeah, your left and your right. Okay, so Zamir and Kieran were both graduates. Kieran graduated from Melbourne Uni. Zamir graduated from Imperial College. And both of them were working in a Big Four consulting firm in Malaysia. Just about 4 or 5 years ago, 2008, 2009, right? And of course, like every Malaysian, they went to mamak stores. Everybody know mamak stores out here? Yes. Go and have coffee, drink teh tarik, talk about the world, talk about the problems, complain about things that are happening. Why? You are complaining about things. So they were complaining about lots of different things, but one theme that always seemed to come up was education, right? Because you see so many different things coming out in the news of late, about education. And so for them, what can you actually do? We're two consultants. They're like your average Joes, right? Start their career, graduate, and things like that. What can they actually do to change? Now, a little bit of background story. Zamir, when he was in Imperial College, graduating, after he graduated, he applied to a few different companies. And one of them was actually the program in the UK called Teach First. And Giles was actually part of that program, which is similar to Teach for Malaysia. So Zamir applied for that program, but he got rejected, right? He applied to a lot of other consulting firms and Big Fours and things like that, but he got rejected from that. And when he came back to Malaysia, very interestingly, he was wondering, why isn't something like this existing in Malaysia? Why aren't there people fighting for better education in this country, right? And you can kind of think about that for your own country as well, right? Why aren't people fighting for a better education system? So what these two people did is said, why don't we start something? 5 years fast forward, we have 160 teachers in 43 different high need schools, right? And a size of an 80 cohort starting at the end of this year. We also have a place in the National Education Blueprint and the 10th Malaysia Plan, right? And this started from a small little conversation at a mamak store. So after this, everybody go to mamak store and talk about something, right? So what I want to move to is thinking about leadership. So we've talked about nation building, we talked about education. Where does leadership fit in all of this? Now, I was in a very similar place because I was working, in HR, starting off my career, and I was thinking, all these problems, what can I do about it, right? And very interestingly, there is a quote that I read online with an unknown source, right? But John C. Maxwell, who's written lots of different books on leadership, mentioned that leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. So what I want to kind of turn your minds to, or if there's a shift in mindset on what leadership is, that rather than being in a position of influence, leadership is having influence in the position that you are in. So a lot of people would think, I will change things when I become CEO, when I become the Prime Minister of Malaysia. How many people here want to be Prime Ministers of their country? Right, awesome. Okay, let's have somebody. I mean, a lot of people want to change something only when they reach that position which they feel they can impact, create influence. But what we don't realize is that all these leaders, they didn't wait. They didn't wait to be the president to make change. They started from where they were. You're all students here, right? You're wondering, entrepreneurship, community development, things like that. You're wondering, okay, what can I do? It starts with us, right? And so I want to go into this concept which some of you may or may not be familiar with. It's called the concept of locus of control. Has anyone heard of that concept before? Can you raise your hand if you've heard of the concept of locus of control? Okay, 2 people, okay. So I was a psychology student before, so I think it's a psychology theory. But what I'm going to share with you, locus of control. So imagine the problem which Giles mentioned earlier, right? Imagine it as a circle. And there are 2 main spheres within this circle, right? Spheres of influence. The first is things that we can control, right? things that we can control, within our control. And the second, of course, would be things that we can't control. Right? Of course, quite obvious. Within the things that we can control are things like our thoughts, our actions, our words, and our mistakes. Right? We can control these things. Is that right? Yeah. What about things that we can't control? Things that we can't control are other people's thoughts, other people's mistakes, environmental factors, authority, lots of different things that are outside of our control. Simple enough to understand? Yes? I want to do a little activity just to kind of let this sink in a little bit, okay? Similar to what Giles did earlier. We're going to focus on a very simple problem. And in pairs, what I want you to do is examine a very simple problem, right? Everybody here students? You all take exams? Is failing an exam a problem? Yes.
No.
No. It's not a problem, okay. Failing exam is a problem, okay? So I want you in your pairs, very quickly, look at the factors on the right-hand side, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In your pairs, I think it will only take about a minute. Which of these fall within things that we can control, and which of these things fall in things that we can't control? Ready? Go.
So if you can hear my voice clap once, if you can hear my voice clap twice, if you can hear my voice, give yourself a hand for a healthy discussion. Yeah? Sorry, it doesn't mean I use it in my class.
Okay, so for number 1, who thinks it is something that we can control for number 1? Yeah, of course, right. Not studying enough. Who thinks it's something that we cannot control? Catch. Number 2, the course was too hard. Who thinks this is something that we can control? So you can tell the lecturer, do not give me that assignment, it's too difficult. Okay, who thinks it's something that we cannot control? Okay, yeah, because you know the lecturer is, they're setting the stuff, right? Okay. Number 3, fell sick. Something we can control? You can control, like, don't fall sick.
Healthy lifestyle.
Okay. Yeah, I went into my final exam in uni with 3 Red Bulls and 2 coffees. It's not the way to go, right? I passed. Who thinks falling sick is outside of our control? Yeah. Okay. Number 4. It wasn't a course that I was interested in, something that we can control. Okay, so I assume you didn't put your hand, something that you can't control. Lecturer was biased. Who thinks something you can control? You can control whether the lecturer is biased or not. Sweet. You guys are going the wrong way. Okay, lastly, the exams was during the World Cup finals. Something you can control? So everybody in the world should have failed during that period. Interesting. So we're looking now to kind of the concept of things that you can control and can't control. But it's very important. It's a very simple example, but it's very important to understand this. Because when I fully understood this and used it in problem solving, only then was I able to effectively figure out things that I can have influence over. Okay? So, talking about the education system, there are things like government, there are things like curriculum, there are things like the quality of teachers, recruitment, and things like that. Do you think this is something that we can control? Government. Can we control government? To a certain extent, you can vote for them. But whether or not you vote for them, they still go in. I didn't say anything. Okay, so. Okay, come back. So, just focusing on the things that we can control, okay? It's very important because a very quick story. There are a number of fellows in different classrooms who've made the decision to teach in a high-need school. regardless of their backgrounds, whether it be from economics to engineering, some of them even doctors before. I was a young professional before choosing to join something like Teach for Malaysia. And each of these individuals thought to themselves, what can I do, right? What is my sphere of influence and what can I change? Cheryl Fernando is a 2013 fellow teaching up in Penang, Tunggal, right? She teaches English. And her students, when she first gave her students a test for English, all of her students on average scored a 0 for oral speaking. That means if you match that in terms of a bar, from year 1 to year 12, they scored year 0, right? So not even year 1. In teaching, in her first year, she's not a teaching graduate, an education graduate. In her first year, she managed to bring her students 2.5 years ahead in terms of oral capabilities, right? In terms of speaking, listening, and reading. And very interestingly, she focused on her classroom, focused on her students. Yes, there's a whole lot of other problems. We have like government problems, we have like PBS problems, things like that, but she focused on her classroom and the things that she was able to do. And her principal recognized her and asked her to do a professional development session for other teachers in her school. The district recognized her and she's now on an SIC coaching program to coach other districts. Alina Amir, formerly a consultant at Accenture, decided that I think teaching is something that can really make a difference. So she's teaching in Pematang Tok Labu, in Taman Sejahtera, Pulau Pinang. And in her first year, in her second year project right now, she noticed a lot of her students in terms of their proficiency levels are very low. But she also saw a lot of very bright students within her classroom. So she started this thing called the Aros Academy. It's a peer mentoring program where students can tutor other students. And she now, 3 times a week, has about 100 students meeting together, coaching each other, right? In maths and science and English. Yin Yi, a fellow cohort of mine, psychology graduate from Health University, worked at a consulting firm for a short while, and she taught for 2 years in SMK Kemas. And at the end of last year, she was thinking, in terms of my sphere of influence, where can I actually have change? Because I've been working in the classroom for 2 years. She got an opportunity to work with PADU, which is part of the Ministry of Education. And right now, she's doing research and solutions, bringing up proposals to make decisions that affect hundreds of thousands of kids at a time, right? But for each of these individuals, they didn't start here. They started somewhere else, right? Where they were, making that decision to create a difference where they were. And so, I think often we can kind of imagine certain things to be impossible, certain things to be impossible. What I want to bring your attention to is this. So in 1876, there was a Western Union internal memo, right, that they actually sent to themselves to say that the telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. This device has inherently no value to us, right? So in 1876, the telephone. So during that time, the reality of it was they had this invention called the telephone, and they thought in their reality, they said this is absolutely no value to us, we should just throw it away, right? But could they have imagined just about 130 years later, every single one of you have a headphone? Have you been on the KTM commuter or the LRT? Right? People are no longer reading newspapers, they're reading Facebook feeds. And they could have never imagined it in 1876. Because, I mean, it was something unthinkable. Other scientists say, there's no such thing as a heavier than air flying plane, right? But my point to this is, what we believe to be impossible today is actually possible if you dare to dream it, right? And work towards it. As a leader, in the sphere of influence and the locus of control that you have. And so I'll end with a quote that we at Teach for Malaysia very strongly believe. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Very interestingly, there are two adjectives that she uses here: thoughtful and committed. Because it is not something that you figure out a solution and solve. It is something that you start solving within that position and influence that you have, and commit yourself to continue solving it. So with that, I think that will be the end of all three of our presentations. We hope you've learned something, and we're going to actually open up to question and answers right now. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you very much for this sharing session. My name is Nader, I'm from Yemen, Middle East. And what I find the problem actually is, I'm doing a PhD in computer science. So one of the problem is, one of my friends, he just finished his PhD. He's in the same age, but when he went back to my country and he started looking for a job, people refused to hire him. And finally he found a job in a bank, but those people thought of him like there is a gap between his education and their experience. So how to close these gaps, and how to educate them that it's not about the age, it's about the mindset.
I don't know in that particular situation, but I think the point you raised is really, really important. Because often, people are bringing change, or a new idea, okay? Or they've had a different experience. And the one thing that will get in the way of getting buy-in is when people can't relate to you. So if you remember when we were talking about that concept of the motor, yeah? So unfortunately, in concept, you could be the most wonderful person who's got definitely the best idea in the world, but the problem is the way you articulate it and the way you come across to other people is not something they're ready for. And that's another bit for the leader, or whoever this person is, not when I say not this person, not your friend, but whoever that leader might be, is how are they coming across to people. And that's absolutely critical. And if I was to have a big criticism of where Teach for Malaysia was about a year ago, was we were not speaking the same language as our partners. So when we work with our teachers in the schools, for example, they're working in the schools, but we had our own rubric for how a great teacher might be. The actual outcomes of what those teachers are exactly the same outcomes as what the Malaysian standard education system was wanting. The only issue was we weren't using the same language. And if we'd just done that, I think we would have made so much progress, so much better progress. And so I'm just using the example of your friend to basically make the point is, if you're bringing change to people, bringing new ideas, make sure that you've got it in a packaged in a way that they can engage with. So it's a bit of meeting people halfway. It's no good, I think, just coming up with the best idea in the world and being so convinced to ourselves if we can't actually get partners on board to go on that journey with us.
Based on what you just asked, it's not easy for somebody with a degree to employ somebody with a PhD. You'll be very scared. Why? If you're a PhD holder and his degree, within 1 month you can overthrow him. So their fear of confidence is there. So he will not feel comfortable to employ somebody higher than him because he's afraid of losing his job. Okay, because the CEO can say, oh, PhD degree, okay, you come this one, and nobody want to experience such. That's number one. And secondly, both of you are not lecturers before you are in a different field. So I want to know what propelled you to change to teaching. Thank you.
So previously, working in the corporate sector, what propelled me to change to education? I don't think it's the specific field of education that propelled me, but more of, I guess, the opportunity to make a difference and create change. Because when you think about all the things that you're complaining about, there is, like Yiling mentioned earlier, education is an underlying factor that relates everything together. But as Giles mentioned, people are such an important aspect of this. And mixing with the right people, sometimes you may have ideas, you may have passion, you may have things that you want to do, but by yourself, in wherever you are, you may not necessarily be able to execute those ideas without the right platform, right? And so when I heard of Teach for Malaysia, or when I heard of the opportunity to go and challenge myself to learn about the education system, to learn about how to figure out solutions, I was really excited. Not because I've always wanted to be a teacher, but because I've always wanted to create an impact in whatever way I can, right? And I think, yeah, that's for me.
I've never actually thought, so like Giles and Ken, both of them were in the fellowship program, but I'm actually currently working as a staff in Teach for Malaysia. But I mean, to my experience of why I decided to join Teach for Malaysia to work as a staff, previously I actually graduated with a degree in accounting, and I was actually working as an auditor in one of the accounting firms, and then I moved on to the corporate secretarial field. So in about 2 years of working, I learned a lot, but I always felt that there wasn't that sense of fulfillment in me, that sense of satisfaction that I was making a difference, and that element was extremely important. It's a personal value in my life to make a difference, and that was why when I actually came across Teach for Malaysia, I saw it as a platform to really create a tangible change. Because I guess for me, what I really wanted to do was to make a difference in lives of people who are underprivileged, people who come from high-need communities. And every time I see a problem, and I think, how do I solve this problem? And I always come back to the same answer. It could have been solved if there was good education, quality education, or if they had equal access to those opportunities in education. And that was why when I actually came across Teach for Malaysia, I immediately jumped on this opportunity to actually create change. Yeah.
So was your name John, was it?
Ritz.
Sorry.
Ritz.
Ritz. Ritz, nice to meet you, Ritz. And I'm just thinking, you spurred me to think, I'm thinking something slightly different, not why did I get into education, but something you said in relation to your friend as well, and I think maybe this might help. You mentioned how maybe the employee was scared of the guy with the PhD. So the question I've got for you all in terms of like the work that you do, when you approach somebody to try to get them on board, do you have a strategy in your head about how you're going to talk to people? Yeah? Okay, great. So I'm going to share a strategy that I think I've fallen into, but it's something I use with the fellows as well. It's a very negative one. Basically, it makes this general assumption. It says this, and I'm sure you can find it possible. And the assumption is this: it says that everybody, generally, for right or wrong, people are generally greedy, people are lazy, and people are scared. Right? And it's not a bad thing because it's just the way it is. But basically, when you're talking to somebody, are you always thinking to yourself the greed aspect? What's in it for them to out of this engagement? Yeah. The lazy aspect is the amount of work or involvement from them going to be outweighed by whatever benefit they get. Yeah? So if it's more work for them, why should they bother? And the last one, to your point, is the fear aspect. How's this going to make me look? Is this young whippersnapper going to come along and make me look bad and take my job? It's a very, very real and honest situation. So I suppose that's the other piece of advice. It's like always thinking about that. Greed, lazy, and fear. I'm sure there's a benefit, another way to think about that's nicer, but it's worked in the past, so I just wanted to share that.
Words, but they couldn't just get it, so I have to call some of my teammates to try to break it down, at least maybe use some local dialects, like local language, to try to explain to them more. So I just want to ask you, like, how are you able to, because I know you have faced this kind of problem as well, like when you are trying to teach these students, like how are you able to overcome this? Because this for me is still like a form of challenge for me presently.
Great, thank you very much. I think number one, just back to actually to Ken's point about the locus of control, I think one thing is I don't actually teach, so I'm not actually teaching students, so I'm kind of safe from that experience. However, I think the locus of control is a really big point to this. It's knowing what am I actually good at. in this moment right now. So I can't actually go and talk to the students, but who could I work with, just like what you're doing at the moment, to make the impact on the students? So I think you're doing exactly what you should be doing, and you can do based on your locus of control. You're using other people around you, leveraging off their skills and their strengths. So I don't actually teach, but in order to achieve the big goal or the big aim, so for example, I just told you about the greedy, selfish, greedy, lazy, scared thing, right? It's because I know that works, but I don't actually go out and meet the general people, but I share that then with those around me, and then I am expanding my area of influence, if you wish. However, sorry, just a quick one. If you do want, we can connect you to teachers who are teaching. Maybe they can share some advice, etc.
So, yeah, it's okay. You can go now. Go on.
Now, there was a general assumption from what I heard just now that better education leads to a better life. Assumption is true, a better career. Now, as the scores of unemployed graduates can testify, that is not always true. So I believe education, in the modern sense, has shifted its aim from a more educate, so learn more to increase your capabilities, to educate so you get certification. So I'm just wondering, Teach for Malaysia, Teach for America, which of these two concepts of education you subscribe to? And whether or not you're trying to change it if it's not the right one.
So, to answer that question, I want to give a bit of context as well, right? So I was teaching in a school, a Band 5 school. So in Malaysia, schools are clustered according to Band 1 to Band 7. Band 7 being the lowest performing school. So I was in a Band 6 school in Pulau Ketam. And the students that I was teaching were 14 and 15, much like what Yiling described. My 15-year-old student was reading Peter and Jane. Anyone know what Peter and Jane is? Yeah? Like Peter and Jane went to a ball, this is a ball, this is a... And so they were like 14, 15. They didn't understand English. And so if you kind of fast-forwarded their future in terms of maybe not being able to pass SPM, not being able to go into university, how I would answer that question is actually, there are two sections to actually think about, right? You're talking about unemployment, but you're also talking about a threshold. So education is not equivalent to a better life, but education increases your opportunities to get a better life, right? So the statistics that we take is about 1 out of 4 Malaysians are only educated up to O levels, right? Or SPM. And they don't have any education above that, right? And so the limitations of their options, if they wanted to, let's say, do architecture or do engineering or earn above a certain amount, they are capped at a ceiling because their highest level of education is SPM, right? But if, let's say, you're given the opportunity to pursue, it doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, I get a degree, I can earn $10,000, but the equation also includes your own hard work as well, right? It just increases your opportunities. And that's why I think at Teach for Malaysia, we strongly believe that education is key to increase the opportunities and expand the choices for our students. Because right now, if they don't pass SPM, they probably have just those few choices in front of them. But if they are able to go further, if they are able to pursue a tertiary education or want even more for themselves, right? Then their worlds will be open. The opportunities for them will be open as well. Thank you.
University. I actually have a thought of conducting a campaign for the school kids from rural areas. So previously, I've been attached to Microsoft. We have been doing a lot of campaigns on introducing computer science generally to kids younger than 7 years old and below, and beyond that. So a lot of people are asking me, hey, can you guys come over to rural areas? Like Orang Asli, places in Perak. There are some in Kedah as well. So just wondering, how can we sustain that? We understand that we really understand that you all need a lot of support. computer science is something that's really new, and a lot of people, wondering what is really computer science is. So we taught them what is coding at a very basic level of it. So just wondering if we can, we can invite them to Taylor's University to use our labs, at the same time it's, getting the exposure for them as well. So what is the university like and things like that. So I'm just wondering if, let's say, they got the very good understanding of what is computer science, what is programming at a very, very early stage, right? How they can sustain it once they're back to their home. So how we can sustain that? Because they need to practice it frequently in order for them to understand, for them to pursue the career in computer science. So how they can, kind of like practice it. So how they can sustain it. So this has always been a problem for me to figure it out. So I need some advice from that. Thank you.
Especially for IT, there is a very heavy resource aspect to it, right? For instance, my school had a computer lab with Windows 95 computers, right? Like the screen was huge, and some of them could barely turn on, right? And I think very interestingly, infrastructure is definitely a very large challenge. Sustainability, there are two aspects, right? If you're talking about sustainability, one would be people, and the other would be resources, right? So if you were to teach them, bring them to Taylor's, in terms of that idea as well, it's actually a very, very good exposure for them, to get them excited, to get them to be able to see the possibilities. Because like some of my students, they have a computer, they can come to school and use like one working computer, and they can actually like just search Google, and suddenly they realize like, wow, there's just so many things. And actually quite a number of students have like Facebook and things like that as well. But if you're going to more rural communities, sometimes in terms of resources, they don't always have that. And so together with your human aspect of getting people and qualified people to actually go and tutor and train them on a regular basis, you would also need to provide them, either get donations and things like that, to actually have a computer set up, right? So there was this very interesting project that was done in India. So if I'm not mistaken, it was in Delhi, right? In a very, very poor slum area, where they actually wanted to, it was a social experiment, they wanted to examine computer literacy, right? How they could actually educate kids. So what they did, it's called the computer in the wall, right? So in India, they got a lot of like mud brick walls. They built a computer into a wall within a very poor community. And it had internet access and everything like that. So what they found, very interestingly, is on a daily basis, students were able to come and interact with the computer, and students could teach themselves how to use that computer, right? Very interestingly, that what Giles mentioned, in our day and age, the way of learning has shifted quite a lot. That it's not so much heavy on people going there to teach, but more of people going there to facilitate. Because students are very curious anyway, right? So if you want to find out more about that, you can go and Google, I think it's like computer in the wall in India or something like that.
Raj, nice thing. I'm going to maybe take a slightly different stance on it. I think Ken's done some, he's tried to give you a solution. My question would be this, is perhaps it's like going back to that idea of the locus of control. And in social entrepreneurship, this idea of pivoting. Okay, so my question would be this, is the goal and the outcomes that you want for your project, okay, maybe you have to change those. Maybe the actual approach is not sustainable and it's about accepting everything. And it could be either trying to find other partners to deliver that, but it could be like just going back to really think about what is it you're trying to achieve and what are the different ways of delivering it that maybe don't need the factors that at the moment you can't control, which is the journey up to the countryside all the time, because you can't fix that perhaps. But how can you still achieve something similar to the outcome you want to do, but in a different way? Which could be, to Ken's point, is you leave the computer there, and that's it, you just leave it switched on. You never come back and see what happens, they teach themselves. And there's that reality sometimes which we have to accept, we have to be able to pivot. And that's to the point of leadership, it's that humility sometimes to actually say, I'm learning as I'm going along, and unfortunately this avenue is not happening, but it doesn't mean you detract from your vision, it just means maybe the kind of way to get there will have to look different. So not trying to be a downer, just thinking it might require different, your solution might not actually be the right solution at this time.
I'm Jacob from University of Malaya. So thank you for your presentation for today. I really learned a lot. But I still am confused, I want to know is only going to high school or going to university only education? Like for example, going to high school or going to university only part of education? That's how I want to know, because I'm confused about that, because education is so big.
University.
Just focus on school.
At the moment, yeah, you just focus on. But I think just another piece, it goes down to the point before about your point about what's the point of education, right? And you were talking about, is it about to get a certificate? Is it about employability, right? That's up to whatever country, whatever the zeitgeist that goes to our time, the general feeling, the politics is, what do we think a good education is? I come from a very small island in the UK, well it's actually not part of the UK, but the other man. What they did, they completely changed the concept of what education is. And they said education is not about going to school. School is just a tool to prepare you for life. And so the education system, the vision was, they based it on something called the 6 R's. And they said fundamentally it's about getting you ready, resilient, resourceful, and something else, I can't remember what it was. And so the whole point of exams is only simply for them in that sense, because it gets you ready maybe for the world of work. But as a teacher or in the school, its main process was not to get you through exams, it was to get these 6 R's. So whether that meant taking on trips out into the community or going up a mountain or doing theatre, it completely opens up what education is really about. And I think that's also a critical piece, is about what is it that people believe and think education should be. And that's a really hard one. And in the Malaysian context, up until you see the vision, the blueprint is different. Because to that point, there's spirituality, ethics, nation building. Yeah? When you talk to people, they just think often education is just about getting great SPM results.
To learn more about from Malaysia, and also I just wanted to say that in Taylor's University, we have a group of campus leaders who actually help us. They are actually like brand ambassadors of Teach from Malaysia on your campus. So especially for Taylor's University students or other local universities,